think we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. This is Style Guide during Development for Project Managers. If this isn't what you were here for, you may be in the wrong room. Let's see. So just a quick about us. My name is Adam Weingarten. I'm a technical architect at Acquia. I am generally on the hook for estimating, designing, implementing, and making sure a project stays on track from a technical perspective.
And I'm Sarah Thrasher, also at Acquia, a senior front-end developer, and my job is to throw off all of the technical architect's estimates. I mean, I'm also responsible for a similar amount of that kind of thing, and for helping clients to figure it out as well. So what is the problem that we have? Getting Drupal to look the way you want is hard. It has been harder in the past, and it's getting easier, but it's still kind of a challenge. And it takes time to get Drupal looking the way that you want it to. It's also hard to find good front-end developers who are willing to work on Drupal. So hence we've had a lot of developments in the field of being a Drupal themer. You might hear like decoupled. And style guides are one of the big things that people have been latching onto. So we'll get into why that is, particularly from a front-end side as well. But the front-end phase of your project tends to be the longest and riskiest phase because we're finishing the whole site and getting all the spit and polish onto it. So when you're starting a project, your client asks for something. You have a UX person or designers coming to you with wireframes and comps. Your back-end developer goes off into a hole, builds a bunch of widgets, and then they throw all this stuff over to the front-end developer, and they're like, okay, well, we'll make it look like these comps. So we start hacking away at that stuff.
Yeah, so what the heck is Style Guide during development? So it's the idea that instead of doing what we just described, you start from the beginning with visual designs. And you decompose them, you break them apart into these small visual components. If you're a developer, this is going to be pretty common, or you've heard a lot about this recently. So component design, component development. And we build, for each one, we create a small ideal model. We put aside all the craziness, all the horrors of the markup that's being generated, just the garbage, and we create a small, perfect model of what we want. We don't build a page, we just build these little pieces. So here's an example, or here's a problem, actually.
So this might look familiar.
So, you want to build a conference website, you give your developers this big comp, and you say, go build this. And, back in the day, they would have tried to just build this huge page thing, and it would be its own, each page would become its own universe. There would be inconsistencies, it would take forever, the developers couldn't actually estimate any of this. It was a disaster.
Sometimes if you have multiple developers working on different sections of the site, they would use different CSS for basically the same elements, so you'd have tiny little inconsistencies.
So if we look at this though, the way that we should be thinking about it is like this.
Okay, so this is taking that same comp and sort of from a really high level, breaking it down into things that can be sort of taken as standalone pieces and worked on as individual components. And when we're talking about components, it's more of a design components than if you've heard the term web components type of thing. So this is more the design and the front end level, and not that. It's actually a whole separate technology that browsers support. But so if you take something like the header or those two blocks down there, and you just work on just that piece and what markup and styling you need to support it. So here we're pulling out just this header banner, right? So it's got a few important elements. There's a background image, there's a logo on it, and there's a bit of text with some specific font styling. So the developer needs to look at that and figure out how to take that in a way that it can be easily slotted back into the main page. And not bite off that entire page at once, basically.
So how do we do this? So the first part of this is, like I mentioned before, forget Drupal. Drupal doesn't exist. all the trauma, all the things that have wronged you in the past don't exist. Get into a Zen place. This is a happy place. It's an optimistic methodology. So you need to get into that frame of mind. Once you've done that, though, you can start to build something.
All right. So this is an example of just a small snippet of markup that we could use to do this banner. It doesn't have to look like this, and this is actually like a slightly simplified example. And this is actually using a little bit of SVG in there for the logo. But this is actually something that you could legitimately put into your style guide. So like the front-end developer could take this. As you can see here, like it's got a custom class on it. This has nothing to do with like, block whatever, or view. Like you don't need to worry about that. You're just taking what classes you need at a minimum, and like semantic markup and whatnot that you need to build out and style this one little piece, and then you worry about getting it into Drupal later.
And I don't want to scare you guys too much. We're expecting that this is for project managers. We're not expecting that you understand all the markup, and that's okay. So take a deep breath here too. That's fine. But that being said, there are things here that should make sense to you even if you're not a technical person. So for example, hero wrapper. Okay, so I have this hero thing. I have some wrapper stuff around it. I have a logo. I have a title. So those are kind of the constituent parts of this component that we're building. So, if I can take this piece and start to describe it like that, everyone can understand it, and we've taken ourselves out of this kind of markup hell. Oh.
Okay. When you start this process out, you don't even need to worry about variables and things like that. But if you're looking at this, we also have in there some very simple twig variables, like alt, title, and whatnot. Anybody who's working on this doesn't even necessarily need to know about where in Drupal that would be coming from. Like there's actually like a simple mechanism to fill those in. So like all you really need is here's the markup that exists for the styling, and what pieces of this are not static. What in there might change, like the text that's in there or the images. Okay, and this is going to be like just a short overview of like the technical side of it. We'll get a little bit more in depth into that. But so you actually take those bits that you've pulled out into simple variables and provide an accompanying JSON file, a very simple one. It's basically just here's a variable name and here's a string or something to fill that out, just for the style guide. This isn't something that the site winds up using. This is just for presentation of this element in the style guide. Okay, so very, very simple. Like you can see, just really simple mapping, URL, colon, and that one's just like the front page, basically. But this is just to fill this out while you're working on it in the style guide. And later, when we start integrating it, these will be actually provided from the site.
It's just test data. That's all we're doing here. We're giving this little model just some test stuff to feed into it. And later on, maybe we can feed it real data.
Right, and this is just an example of some CSS that goes with that markup. A lot of times when people are starting out, you'll find like people putting snippets various places, like a standalone HTML file or something like code path. So like this workflow is actually not that different from what a lot of front end people do when they're working on their own custom CSS in the first place. And the bit that actually ties it into the style guide is that chunk of comment at the top. That's actually parsed over by a style guide generator. They can differ a little bit from system to system, but most of them have something like that in order to point out that this is a piece of the style guide. But other than that, this is exactly like what you would use to style a theme that wasn't using this.
So we take all of these different components that we built, and then those pieces that we just walked you through, we've run it through this style guide compilation tool. And like Sarah mentioned, you can use whichever one you want. In our case, we like to use KSS Node. It's our go-to. People like Pattern Lab. Other people, there are other ones I think we'll mention later on. But you run a build and you get a static HTML style guide from all of us, with our header, with some example HTML for what this is looking like. How did this happen? Yeah, we'll figure that out. Just sit tight. We'll get there. And then the next step, though, is once we have that style guide, we can start to integrate this with Drupal. So in this case, what we're doing is we're actually referencing this little model that we created in our style guide and connecting it in a Drupal template and passing variables from Drupal. So the thing that's powering our little style guide examples just grew up and they became a lot more powerful.
Yeah, and this doesn't matter which Drupal template this is. This could be a views template, this could be a field template, this could be a block template, this could be a node template, it could be literally anything. And those variables that we're passing in there, this with statement is actually taking those simpler variables that we set up on the style guide side and passing a variable from Drupal to it. So that hero.twig, that's not a twig file that Drupal would recognize. It would, you're looking for like block.html.twig or node-banner.html.twig or something like that. But with this embed and or include, you can use that with that. That same hero.twig could be reused between your Drupal site and like a WordPress site that you were passing something in from WordPress to as well. So like the style guide could be reused across multiple systems even because it doesn't know anything about the Drupal side of things in that simpler template.
And this is the difference between a style guide and a living style guide. So a living style guide actually powers your site. That's what this does. This animates and brings it to life.
Yeah, if you compare that static thing to like, let's say what you're looking at when you're evaluating like Bootstrap or Foundation, all of that markup is just what you get with the JavaScript and styles that you downloaded from Bootstrap. But once you start customizing that, your site's not going to look exactly that way. So if you're using something like this, as you work on the theme and you build out your styles and your markup and everything, this style guide will continue to look exactly like that stuff would look as used on your actual site. There.
And you get to benefit from all of it. So at this point now you have this style widget. It's in Drupal. It's alive. And like I said, it's powered by your style guide. Go drink. And then once we've done that, we can start to do more.
Right. So this is an example here of one of those other little chunks that was on that homepage, where this would be something that's more like a block or a field or a view, right? Where you've got like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these. So each little piece of your style guide, anything that you can break out into a component, should really just be one thing, because you have to translate this into a template somehow, and most templates are just one thing. That's kind of the point of templating. It's like, let's take something and then press it out over and over and over and over again. But there are some instances where when you've got something like this, you also need to take into account like a wrapper for a group of things, which these methods also accommodate. But like each individual thing, you should think in terms of what is the smallest little bit that I can template out that makes sense. But you can also take that and then maybe have like a piece that's simply for the style guide that isn't used in your site that you embed like multiple things into. You can pass them different pieces of test data, so you can try out like different line lengths, different images, things that might possibly break it, translations, stuff like that. So just keep on breaking out and naming little individual reusable chunks, work on them, show them to people on the project, test them out in different browsers and different devices, until you're finished.
That would never happen. Who here has change request PTSD? Hands? Oh, 3 people? 4? I don't quite believe that. Yeah, so it happens. It's a thing. So what do? Okay, you put a change request in. It's not a big deal. And you just make changes to your style guide. You have these little blocks, so if they want to start to mess with them, well, now you're not untangling an entire page, you're untangling a little component. That's not so scary. You saw it, you guys, it was, we're talking maybe 10 lines, 20 lines of code here. Okay, you change it, you quickly rerun your style guide, you look at the block, you see if there are any visual regressions. Move on.
One of the benefits of this workflow is it gives you a single canonical place to look for that piece without having to go, all right, now we don't have any nodes with this type of content yet, but if you go make one and make sure that you check this box and this box and this box, and then we can fix that bug on there.
And there's going to be another one. There's always another change request. But it gets you into that groove, so it's not a big deal then. Like, you can make those changes really quickly. You can see on a project I'm working on, we actually did about I would say 1,800 line refactor of some code. Yeah, massive. We had the regressions ironed out of it within about 3 days. Whereas I never would have attempted this before on a site that was built with that monolithic approach. It would have been suicidal, and it would have taken weeks. So you can be a lot more aggressive with things when you start to build things in a componentized fashion. Tell them about the magic.
Cool. Okay. So
The space works better. It's safer.
Cool. So it's not really magic, shockingly. The style guide, whichever method you choose to build it, they're pretty much all static site generators of some type or another. They have their own templates. They use usually things that are fairly compatible with Drupal. KSS Node used to use handlebars. The current version 3 actually uses Twig, so it's legitimately the same exact technology you're using to template your Drupal 8 site. There were a few things where people used this in Drupal 7, but PHP template and Twig and handlebars aren't really compatible in that way. Since we're in Twig now, there's a lot more possibilities with actually reusing the templates within the templates. There's also a few other things like the UI patterns module, where you don't even need to do embeds. Like you just do this through the UI, and there's like YAML files that tell it what data matches with what and what fields are available. So there's a lot of cool action in this area. I think Mario Hernandez from MediaCurrent had another presentation this week on like more of the technical side of working with this stuff. So that might be a good thing to look up if this interests you. And I think it's also TSS Node. So.
Yeah. And if you're trying to share this with any of your devs, it definitely is pointing to Mario's presentation.
Yeah,
he does a good job.
Cool. So you're working with a set of templates. They're not Drupal specific. You don't need to use Drupal to create one of these. You can even do this completely separately from a Drupal site and get it all finished before you start even integrating it into a theme. And like I was saying, people do in fact use these things across different systems like Drupal and WordPress or something. So as long as Twig is supported, you can reuse this stuff across like different systems. The difference between, I think Adam already alluded to this, just a style guide and a living style guide is that the style guide and your theme actually pull in the same assets. So you're not just using it as a reference and copying and pasting code back and forth. You're actually literally using the same files and assets between the two so that they are actually in sync, and when you make a change in the style guide, it's reflected on your site. So that's a big benefit. I've worked on both types of projects, and it is a bit of a pain to keep the templates in sync with the templates. It's like you don't want to have to like make sure that you change something, in 2 different places constantly. There is a little bit of a balance though when you're using these things with like having to keep certain like Drupal specific functionality in mind, like attributes, variables, and whatnot. But it's relatively minor, and people are working on this all the time. This is a little snippet of Gulp for integrating this into your build. There's a lot of starter themes for this. Acquia PS has one called Cog, where you can actually run this out of the box. I think there's one called Emulsify. There's a Pattern Lab starter theme. So like, you don't even necessarily have to work out yourself how to integrate this. Just do a little bit of Googling, decide if you want to try KSS Node or Pattern Lab, or there's tons of others too. And I'm sure you can find a Drupal specific starter kit for it. And it's really good to make sure that you're using something like Gulp, Grunt, NPM scripts, or something like that to run this, so you don't have to like give people a lot of steps to remember when they're like updating something. Yeah, why?
Yeah, why should you? I mean, I would be skeptical. You're project managers. I mean, devs come up with all sorts of cool stuff, and they want all the new shiny toys, and often it doesn't have business value. So what are we talking about here? What's the benefit? Give me a reason. I'll give you 8. We can justify this one.
All of my ideas have business value. What are you talking about?
So the first thing is it validates clients' business requirements. And I'm going to go through each of these a little bit more. It's going to increase the accuracy of our estimations, speeds up our development a lot. I just finished a sprint with a team of developers where we just had 300 story points. Like, it's insane. We can increase the quality of our deliverables. As we mentioned before, you can increase your confidence with change requests and code refactors. It's going to accelerate the velocity with which you actually deliver the code, and it increases the pool of developers that you can use. And just putting all the pieces together is so much easier. So, on validating the client's business requirements, how does it do this? It allows us to preview styling and markup without a backend. So the minute that we start a project, we can start to decompose the comps, we can start to create these components before the backend people have even stood up the hosting or stood up Drupal. We can start to get these pieces together. The front-end devs can start running, and then they can start to get these things in front of clients really fast. So you can get feedbacks from them, and then you can also fix all the little nitpicks that happen when you're doing styling. And that's the way it is. I mean, there's always like, bump this over this many pixels, change this, capitalize that, don't capitalize that. So that sounds like Agile, right? That's like, well, yeah, it is. And the sad fact is that most of us haven't actually been using Agile for front-end development all these years. We've actually been doing front-end development like waterfall model.
How soon can you get me that theme?
Right. So this is a really big game changer. So there are a lot of ways in which it is more, by taking something, decomposing it, creating small movable tickets, we can actually, estimate things. We can keep things moving. We don't have these huge bottlenecks. We'll get into more of it. But, yeah.
So it really is a big benefit to not have to go through Drupal to build things, even if you're very familiar with Drupal. Like, a lot of times when you've got like multiple people working on something, like I was saying earlier, it's kind of a pain in the butt to have to wait around for the content type to actually exist. So sometimes that's a thing. Well, people are like arguing about, what different fields things are going to have. And then like every time you're going to go and work on it, you have to go and like recreate a bunch of nodes. You just blew away your local because somebody's got some kind of crazy build tool that reinstalls everything every time, It's not crazy. These are all good tools, right? But you don't even have to worry about that. You've got a little piece of static templated stuff. The content's being flown into it from a JSON file. It's always there when you want to start working. And it's basically just the stuff that you as a front-end developer care about, which is I have div, some other little tag, I've got the classes I wanted in the first place, and here it is with some test content. So you can have people who don't know anything about Drupal and just want to work on CSS and HTML, get in there and do their thing. Another benefit is, like I said, you don't need Drupal at all, and it kind of forces you to work in an object-oriented CSS kind of paradigm. Because you need to pick out your pieces as individual design modules. So that means that your CSS and your other JavaScript and everything like that don't interact with each other. Like you namespace everything. You work them out as individual things that work apart from the other pieces of your theme. So it's easier to pick them apart and make changes to them without worrying about what other 50 things might have been using that one utility class that you put in there. So that methodology is not necessarily for everybody, but these things really support each other. So I think it's worth looking into and considering whether that might work with your architecture. And there's multiple ways to do this. Like you're not like tied into BEM or OOCSS or something like that. But since Drupal 8 kind of uses BEM out of the box, we tend to lean towards that method just because it goes well with core and contrib themes. BEM is actually like just a naming method for classes that keeps specificity down. I just want to like define that one for people. You can take your front end work and do it alongside back end work. With an integration phase later where somebody's actually putting together the theme templates. So when you know that you need, like your banners and your blocks and your like sidebar news feed and things like that, the styling and the bits where module work is actually done can go on like separate tracks at the same time, or even just have the front end work done completely separately from the back end work, which is kind of why these things are called that. So that's a big benefit in terms of speed. The inconsistencies thing is something that I have come across on a lot of projects, and trying to keep Drupal-specific stuff out of the things that you work on in your style guide also has a major benefit, where like if you've got people using some of those like out-of-the-box Drupal classes, like .field item or whatever. Sometimes people will throw padding onto some of these like more generic classes without realizing, because they're like in this like, I'm fixing this page kind of mindset, and then you don't realize that there's like 50 other pages that obviously had, you know, .field item on something or another, or .panel pane, and suddenly there's like, you know, padding blowing everything out. So like if you try to stick to this more modular method of doing CSS, there's a lot of benefits there of not randomly breaking stuff, and having people like do slightly different styling for, you know, major subtitle H2 everywhere, where like the client's going to be like, why are these a slightly different weight? Because you're reusing the exact same literal thing everywhere. And being able to break something down into smaller tasks is sort of the canonical way to estimate properly. So it's a good thing to bring into your theme and styling work, because you know, if you're like, how long does it take you to build a theme? It's like, I don't know, what's in it? What are we styling? You know, obviously like these things are like a much bigger question, but this lets you focus on, well, the banner's probably going to take me half a day, you know, if that, and like actually estimate those smaller chunks out properly. And then it's very easy to test and QA these little bits all by themselves, including like whatever responsive styling, which should be baked into your components. And you can test the style guide the same way you would your actual site. If you're using something like browser, so you can roll in there and like test it on iPhone and Android and whatnot, and just make sure that that piece works. There's obviously like a bit of a like, you know, how do these things interact element, but there's going to be that anyway.
And you can also do incremental accessibility testing on these pieces as well. So on our project, what we do is every time that we do one of these new components, we actually run it through, you know, like waves to check and make sure, are these actually WCAG AA compliant? And if you start to address accessibility concerns as a part of quality as opposed to a feature, it becomes a much, much smaller lift when you finally do your accessibility audit. Okay, you'll find 5 to 8 issues as opposed to like 100. You know, those are always delightful when it's you're taking the feature-driven approach to accessibility.
And the style guide is also an excellent place if you have any sort of like automated visual regression testing. It's like a good first pass to go and like make sure that you haven't broken things across like multiple pieces.
So the next thing that it really does help you with is increasing the accuracy of your estimation. So we all suck at estimating things. The bigger the thing, the more we suck at doing it. So if we decompose these large tasks into smaller tickets, there's a higher chance that we're going to be more accurate. And also, developers don't get stuck in a corner for like a week before they come up for air and tell you that there's a problem. So you expose things more quickly. So can anyone tell me how big this is? Like, how many units, how many squares are in this? I have no idea. But how many are in here? 9, there you go. So it's just, you know, it's a totally contrived example, but it's not totally inaccurate either. You know, if we have small things that are in that 9 range, we can see it, we can visualize it, we understand that, we can comprehend it. This thing, this big giant cube, that's beyond my comprehension. I couldn't tell you how long it would take me to build this thing. So the next thing is it really does increase the quality of our deliverables. So when we break up, as part of this, what we do is we typically break up our front-end or back-end development. So we said that, you know, the front-end developers can go in a corner, they can do their thing, the back-end developers can go and do their thing, which means they're each doing, and they're doing them with a more ideal model, which means they're doing it better than they would have been doing them if they were doing them at the same time. If they were doing them together, the front-end person would have been using all sorts of weird classes from Drupal. They would have tried to add padding to those weird classes like Sarah mentioned. It would have been brittle, it would have been ugly. So we split these out, and by doing that, we really increase the quality. So each person can focus on their craft in their domain. We mentioned about change requests. These become a lot easier. So first off, if you change the model, Drupal changes with it. And then also, you know, as you change it, you can quickly do regressions, you can test it, all these pieces. So we really have nice little Lego blocks. We can QA the Lego blocks instead of QAing like the whole Lego sculpture.
I think it really is very helpful having persistent test data at all times. And it's not something you would necessarily want to do in your actual real site, you know?
Yeah. And then the final piece, if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who are interested in doing CSS and JavaScript but can't stand looking at Drupal markup. So this kind of thing is building Drupal's reach to people who are like a more traditional front-end developer. And you're still going to need somebody who is a traditional Drupalist in order to integrate things later. Like, we saw this small example. There was little Drupal variables in there, and somebody's still going to need to go through there and either do pre-processing or just set the correct field formatter for that thing on the Drupal side. But once that's done, those little variables are very easy to move around for somebody who has no clue how Drupal works. So you could take somebody who's really excellent at front end, but doesn't really know Drupal yet, and have them take responsibility for the front end look. And basically, I think we said this a couple of times, you don't even need your back end team there to work in this method. The front end people can just take this and build this thing out, test it, have basically everything from the comps ready to go before the site even really exists.
And if you're on a larger team, it's a great opportunity to start to onboard people. So you can take a traditional front end developer, you can have them start to do some of this stuff, and then maybe they start to pick up a different ticket. So it's kind of like a gateway drug to hopefully get them hooked on Drupal.
Yeah.
But they don't have to. If they want to stay in their swim lane, that's totally okay too.
Yeah, and this Drupalist who does the integration, back-end guys are usually at least familiar enough with, the templates to move things around in this, to mate them up with whatever twig variables you've set out for the theme pieces. So it's also a good reference for back-end PHP-focused people to, know what templates they have available to work with and, what they're for and everything. So there's documentation around them.
And we'll often break this down into about 3 tickets is kind of the way it starts to look. So you end up having, let's say you want to build a thing. You have
naming is still the hard part.
Yeah, a widget, whatever. It's always a hard part. Let's say you want to build this thing. You typically have a front-end style guide ticket. You'll have a back-end ticket for the code that drives the thing, and then you'll have a theming ticket, which then brings those 2 pieces together. And each one, let's say, each of them is maybe like a 3-point ticket, so that 9 actually is random, but actually makes sense. And we talked about in that grid before. And that the bringing those together, we call that theming. And theming used to be really, really hard and painful because it was being done at the same time as styling. So we break them up into those 3 tasks, as we mentioned before, they all end up working better, and they're all really low LOE then by themselves.
Front-end people do not love working with PHP.
keep them happy. And then ultimately the integration becomes a lot simpler. Like we said, you can make those aggressive front-end changes without being afraid. You can avoid the regressions, and you can actually test the things that you're doing.
So, like I was saying, the act of creating the style in and of itself actually does document your theme system. That's totally why Bootstrap and Foundation and things like that are so popular. What you're winding up with is basically your own miniature Bootstrap that documents how this stuff is actually used on your real site. And as for that naming issue, I do find that UX people are usually a bit better at naming these things than I am. So you're going to want to get them involved. Maybe they're just reading through the thing and we already have a thing, and we can use that for this thing that we want. And or maybe we need a variant of it, but we're going to use this as the starting point. So your entire team needs to use this as a document and a record of what kind of front-end stuff you already have available, what variations and bits it has going for it. And there's literal documentation in here. You can include comments and descriptions and links out to other resources. Just a description of what the thing is for. It can even be valuable for editors. A lot of sites put out a public version of their style guide that they will actually link to for you put a link to it below the content entry form, so that people can reference that they have, this is what these buttons in the WYSIWYG do. If you use this and you add this class to it, it looks like this. It can also record things like traditional branding guidelines, like fonts and colors and things like that. So even as you're working on it or using the thing later, it's a good piece of documentation for the project.
And colors especially are a great one, because those you end up with like 50 shades of gray. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, you end up with all these redundant things in your theme.
Light gray.
Yeah.
Light gray too.
So if you have that in your style guide, you can expose it really quickly and start to nip that in the bud.
So yeah, who knows why this happens, but this constantly happens. And like, there's even like tools that people have built to like check through CSS to see why you have like 50 versions of like 555 in there, 556. Like having like variables and like actual this one is the correct light gray for our brand in like a central place everybody is supposed to be referencing when they're doing their work is extremely valuable.
Yeah, and then ultimately, once you have this, you can use this this library to help onboard new UX people, so they know what your guidelines actually are. They can know how to reuse, like Sarah mentioned. New developers can start to actually have models for how things have been done before. So if I'm a new developer coming on and I'm like totally deer in the headlights trying to figure things out, I can look at these and get my bearings pretty quickly. Like, it's not too bad.
Like, don't use the dropper. We've got variables for all this stuff.
It really does help.
Cool. So this is just sort of an example of like a fully featured style guide, like the amount of things that you might have broken out in here. And you can see that like what KSS does, you can actually control this like a little bit, but it even like breaks these things out into like linkable sections. You can have like as many subsections as makes sense for your project. So you can have like less, more, different organization. If you're looking at Pattern Lab, it's a little bit more opinionated than this because it's got the whole atoms, molecules, organisms sort of thing. But like whatever architecture you wind up using can be customized to your project. So this is something for what you have built with the naming of that you have developed with your team. You definitely don't want to be calling everything thing or widget. And like these are actually like really sensible names. I think these are a little bit small, but like and even this one messages. Like that's kind of obvious. Like if you know Drupal or like any other website, what is that? That's obviously those bars that come across the top with like red, something broke, green, I'm just telling you that you saved the page. So it's simple to like read through for a human, and you don't have to guess, with the strange maze of selectors that your front end guy built, like what this thing is here for.
Yeah, I mean, you have 404s, titles, solution references, like all these things. This was one that we did a while back, actually in a D7 site, but works
so
great.
This one wasn't
living.
As living. We're using the same CSS everywhere, but the templates weren't shared.
So, overall, getting Drupal to look the way you want is really hard. It can be. It's not the easiest thing. And, hopefully, you've seen some ways that, we can make it a little bit easier and also make it better for your developers. Especially, one of the great things about this, if you feel bad for your front-end developers, and you should, because at the end of, generally what happens is, traditionally, at the end of every project, there's a huge mad dash to style all the things. So then the front-end developers end up not sleeping at all for like weeks to try to finish all the things that no one could estimate. So hopefully, taking this approach will smooth things out for them. It'll make life better for them. It'll lower their stress, which ultimately is good for you as a project manager because it lowers your stress. If you're seeing these things steadily get done, everything's awesome, everything's under control. You take the edge off, you take the crisis away. So, it makes a big difference. Hopefully,
there are so many tools out there for this. KSS Node and Pattern Lab are just scratching the surface. There's tools based on those tools. There's starter kits for those. There's been BOFs at every single DrupalCon that I've been to in the last couple of years about this concept. So like this is definitely the way that things are moving towards, and there's plenty of stuff out there to assist. And these component-based approaches to theming are not going anywhere. This is definitely like the direction that the industry is going. And I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about living style guides, from here on out, because it just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So when you do hear about this, from from your different engineers, developers here at the conference. At least now, hopefully you'll know a little bit about what it is and why this is something you should care about. So that's what we had prepared for you guys. Do you have any questions? Really? Yeah.
Okay, I'll actually, it's probably not within your scope, but I'm a front-end developer,
Okay.
a site builder. That's what I do. Because I'm on a really small team, I self-manage a lot. You're totally right that they send me, estimate retheming this site.
It's 20 hours for the theme, you're done, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, it's 4 hours for me to give you an estimate, and then we can talk. But one of the things that kind of bugs me about the component-based style guides is that because I'm also the site builder on many of our projects, I'm really doing it twice. I don't want to build those separate templates. I really just want to build it once. And it seems to me that you can have a component mindset in your site building and not have to do this separate thing. So I can build my components into like a dummy content type or something where we can still do the kinds of things you're doing with style guides without having to learn this whole nother thing, because trust me, as a front end, there's a new JavaScript thing to learn every day.
Yeah, I think that's exactly why this method is becoming popular. But so it's like you're taking like, you have like several different content types, right? But you have like a news feed. Every single thing has something you would call like a teaser, kind of a view mode, right? That little embed chunk that you created for the style guide is like a teaser, and like here's your full view article or whatever. That's usually going to be like more components than just one component. But that little teaser thing is a good example of a component. You reuse the exact same twig file from the style guide for, article, news, event, or whatever.
As long as their data structure is the same. But if I'm using view modes and display suite properly,
well, it doesn't. You don't need. You could be using view modes for that. But this could just be node -- teaser. And you're like embedding that thing, or like yeah. And this is going to be like, it gets more complicated. You're delving into like real pieces, obviously. But that's exactly, avoiding rework is exactly the reason why components make sense.
That's the goal. And I would like to see some people talking about actually doing it as a site building component as opposed to this separate thing. You've got these. And all I'm hearing so far, you've got these two things going on, and then they come together. Why can't you be doing the site building at the same time?
The problem with that has often historically been that you end up with just a mediocre result by doing them together. Often by coupling them, you go away from that ideal model. You end up getting a lot of Drupal isms injected in, and you really do need that kind of canvas to actually get it done right.
Or somebody who is using display suite or some other tools to wipe clean everything and rebuilding.
Yeah, I think like on a smaller project where you've got like one front-end developer who's like, oh yeah, no, I already did this teaser, I'm just going to reuse the same stuff. But if you've got like a big team and people are like varying levels of skill, or like you might find that somebody did like all their styling on like a component, like this is like my news item. But somebody else did like node teaser article and node, and like there's similar CSS that gets to the same look, but it's on completely different selectors, or things like that. And that's what the component's trying to avoid. It's like, all right, well I updated this, but why does this one still look different? It's like, oh, way down here on line 5,000, somebody did this a different way. That's the kind of thing I think they're trying to avoid with that.
Completely valid point, and I appreciate your making that because I work on small teams.
Yeah, it's very different when you're the only one. I still think there's some benefit to it, but this is definitely more around like larger projects and larger teams and collaborating and trying to keep everybody on the same page.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you
even
for elaborating on that.
yeah, and even like if I was working on a website for my wife, and I used this, and I was able to achieve more in less time by doing that. I mean, even just as an individual, it would have taken me longer if I was trying to do the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the core themes, like Bartik and Classy, like they use like the BEM. I think that's not even really just like having a style guide. That's just the component-driven styling, and I think that it's maybe a little bit divisive for people, that whole concept, but like it makes a lot of sense why people are going there, and there's so many variations on how to do that.
Any other questions? No? Oh, yeah.
Just an agnostic question.
Uh-huh.
Do you prefer Foundation or Bootstrap?
I mean, it's like asking if you like the Red Sox or the Yankees. I mean,
That's what I'm asking.
Like personally?
neither. It depends. It depends on what the designs are that you're getting. If your designer likes one, go with that one. If your designer is designing in terms of the other, use that. And if they're not designing in terms of either, don't use it.
Yeah.
How about transitioning from Bootstrap to, let's say, Foundation?
I think like if you know what you're doing and you're not just like learning tools, it's equally easy to use either of them. They're both very well documented. They're professional. They handle like most situations you might want on a web page. But like Adam was saying, I think most of the projects that we work on tend to have extremely custom designs where you're going to be like overwriting most of that stuff anyway. So we tended to go for like a more stripped down approach and start from scratch. But if you're on like a small project, a small timeline, and you're working with a designer who likes one of those things and is going to actually use them in the designs, they make a lot of sense. And it makes it easier to hand things around to people because they're going to be able to lean on the official documentation and have the familiarity and like things already styled out that you don't have time to touch and all that stuff.
Any other questions? No? Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Appreciate it.
We actually had a lot of